Hi, my name is Maxi Glamour, and I'm here today with Anne Schweitzer, and we just want to talk to you about policy and the environment because they go together because you can't have government if you don't have the earth. So with Donald Trump coming to office, we've had a lot of rolling back of women's rights. We've had a lot of rolling back on ecological sustainable rights when it comes to like coming out of the Paris Climate Accord and etc. So how does that impact us here in St. Louis, and what can we do?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. The thing that I'm worried about right now is what's going to happen with federal funding to St. Louis in general. We are depending on federal funding for things like the expansion of the Green Line, where we depend on them for so many different infrastructure projects. So my biggest concern with St. Louis is, will St. Louis be able to access federal funds like it has over the past 4 years? And there have been a lot of federal funds, whether it's through American Rescue Plan Act or Build Back Better, that have gotten into St. Louis. And I think we should be really concerned about what we're going to get here from the federal government when we've gotten used to getting a lot of support under the Biden administration.
So a lot of money is going to be gone. So when we're looking at trying to make new policy, is that going to be a huge hindrance? Like say we want to create policy to protect the river or the earth.
Well, when I think about working as a local elected official in St. Louis City, I'm really thinking about what are the basic services that the city of St. Louis is supposed to be offering? Where does the environment, ecology, all of that overlap with the basics that the city absolutely has to provide, whether it's picking up trash, our parks, buildings, the amount of emissions in buildings? That's what I'm thinking about as honing in as possible on what the city is already doing and how it could improve on those things. I think it's really exciting in St. Louis how much the Parks Department and Forestry are working to plant native plants in the parks and the removals of honeysuckle and invasive. I know in my ward there's $40,000 of work going into Carondelet Park to remove invasive species, and the state is participating in that. So I really think there's a lot of on the ground, hands-on things that the city can do to be greener and to use the services that it already provides as how it can improve upon how it interacts with the environment, as opposed to creating new things or doing things that are outside of the realm of what the city is doing day to day. It's figuring out how to make those day-to-day things the most environmentally friendly they can be.
So that $40,000, that could be a lot of money. Some people who are on the other side of the political spectrum than I would say that's frivolous. We don't need to spend money on protecting the environment. Honeysuckles and invasive species, they don't impact me. I need money in my pocket. How do these kind of things correlate?
Well, if we want healthy trees in a healthy park, having invasive species there makes that a lot harder. That also chokes out a lot of the native species that are in the park and makes it harder for trees to thrive. So when we depend on our parks to help cool our city, we depend on our parks to help to process carbon dioxide, the trees in our parks and all these things that we depend on as services that the park provides back to us. If the invasives are there and honeysuckle is there, it makes it harder for it to do that. The state level is considering a bill that would ban the sales of certain species, including honeysuckle, winter creeper, things like that, that I think would be really helpful because the proliferation of that is very problematic. And when you think about how to save money, it's like prevention's really key. So stopping people from planting these species that end up taking over our public spaces is a huge part of saving the taxpayer money on the back end to when it has to be removed. But that $40,000 isn't just from the state. It's a combination of private donors. It's a combination of volunteer hours that qualifies, for match funds with the Missouri Department of Conservation. And it's really just a lot of people who care about their park. So that really brings me back to the community effort that can be done to add more to the green infrastructure in St. Louis and to support the environment of our native spaces.
Awesome. So when we're thinking about St. Louis, it's very fractured. We have a lot of wealth inequality. We have really, really poor and we have really, really rich. And so a lot of rich areas, they have access to their trash being taken care of quite frequently on a regular schedule. The people who are living in lower income areas, sometimes they don't have the equal access to waste management or even the capacity to even care due to other factors in their life. How will you take this civic pride of caring for the city and caring for the earth that the city is on? How do you take this and make this more accessible to people who are struggling with their day-to-day and they don't have enough capacity to add more things to their plate?
Well, I really appreciate that question. And I've spent a lot of time in all parts of the city and mostly, in my ward, the first ward, which is a very diverse ward. It has that, breakdown that you just mentioned. And there are parts of it that are treated sometimes as dumping grounds for people to just put massive loads of trash in the alley and treat the community with that level of disrespect. So I do appreciate that there are stronger, enforcement practices now for when that happens. So if people see it, they, make sure to say something, report it. People don't deserve to be treated that way in their community. And so I focused a lot on that in the areas where it happens most frequently and have worked with some of the property owners there to really clean up a lot of these areas. It is that visible sign that people don't care about you if you are treated that way, or if trash piles up. So I think the cleanups that we've done, both in a large scale with refuse getting more involved in the larger enforcements for larger fines rather for dumping, but also, hundreds of thousands of pieces of trash have been picked up in Carondelet and the Patch through programs like Trash for Trees and other just neighborhood events. Representative Steve Butts has regular events where they get multiple dumpsters and they go to the worst places in the ward and clean up. So I feel like our ward has really improved over the last few years, and that sort of visible trash in the alleys and around us. But as we know, we need to reduce the amount of trash that's going into those bins. So it's spreading a message of reduction, of purchasing reduction, and what is the best way to get rid of trash? What kind of trash should be where? And that is a big education campaign. There's some cultural changes that need to take place at any type of person, no matter where you come from, you're going to be wanting to buy stuff, So It's figuring out how to get that message to everyone so that less trash is produced, because the amount of trash the city has picked up and picks up and across the country really has enormously skyrocketed in the last 20 to 30 years from kind of regular trash use. And now it's so much higher. So thinking about that and the just consumption in general.
We're a trashy city. So, having access to these resources is one thing, but actually implementing them is another. And so what are ways that we can help people reach the state of mental capacity to kind of care about more than just the instant gratification of feeding themselves and feeding their kids and paying rent?
You really hit the nail on the head with just the hierarchy of needs. Those things do need to be met, I think, before people are able to look outside of those needs in order to participate. And, again, but the people who are not dealing with those problems or, have all of those things handled need to be taking that responsibility on. And then for anything that the city is doing to make sure that there's affordable housing being built, making sure that there's, just outside the city of St. Louis is, political realm necessarily, but, St. Louis public schools are providing what they need to be providing to youth. And there's, family services across our city, health centers available, all of those things are also part of the equation. It's really interesting how much overlaps in the type of solutions we want for our city and the ability to make sure that everyone has what they need in the city of St. Louis.
It's almost intersectional, one would say.
I think one should say that, yes.
Gotta have some water. Stay parched. We're back. Speaking of water, you in the first ward, you're right by water. The biggest river in North America, the Mississippi River. The Mississippi River goes directly to the Gulf of Mexico, and
that is its name
for now. Let's keep it that way. And so, trash and toxins go into this, but also with increased flooding and global warming, polar ice caps are melting.
Yeah.
That water is going somewhere and it's going into our rivers. You've in the first ward have had some pretty severe floods in the last decade. That down Broadway, many businesses either had to shut down. No, they just had to shut down, basically. There was so much water that they couldn't function. So when we're looking at climate catastrophes, there are a lot of climate scientists that say they're going to get exponentially worse with the way that global warming is happening. What are some precautions that can be put into place to ensure that the first ward doesn't get wiped off the world because of the Mississippi River?
I appreciate that question, and I think it is so important to plan for the catastrophes that could occur and to make sure that the infrastructure that the city has is going to be able to handle it. That's why I'm so happy that the increase in taxes passed for MSD to do more rainwater management, and a lot of the projects that they've had in line for years. I think the number I last heard was $700 million of identified projects. There'll be money to do these projects now when, before that tax vote passed this past April, there just wasn't the money available for it. There was no dedicated funding source. So they're going to be moving through a lot of projects across the region, some of which are in the first ward over the next few years, and then in perpetuity with this funding source, which is incredibly important. So one, I think recognizing the problem, having a solution for it and a plan, because these infrastructure changes are huge and take a long time to put into place. Regarding the questions about, things getting into the river, pollution into the river, I am a believer in a good old-fashioned cleanup. I think that if we get as much trash off the streets as possible and get things to the right places and keep trash from getting into the river, that's hugely important. I really believe in that, and it's a great way for people to get involved in a very grassroots way, knowing that what they're doing is making a difference. I think the number is that there at any one time there's 180 something pieces of trash per person on the planet. So you have to pick up 180 pieces of trash every week or so. You're gonna be making a difference, So trying to really see your own purpose in that, I think, is important. And then I also really believe in rainwater management and using rainwater. I think that the Project Clear grants that are available through MSD are really awesome and important. I know you're a gardener, I am as well, and thinking about how we're using the space around our home to capture that water and keep it on site and use it for nourishing ourselves. And people used to grow so much more of their own food. So how can we participate in a way that's keeping water on our site, and how can we use that water to our advantage to help us out in other ways, in other nutritious ways. So I think those are all pieces of it. But the infrastructure improvements that'll be happening over the next several years now that this tax is passed, I think are really crucial to making sure St. Louis is ready.
I love that. I'm really into, the government being a communal force to ensure that we as a society are contractually obligated to look for the best routes, the best plans of actions. But there are also privatized companies that are seeing a hole within institutional structure and making sure that they can hop in. We're looking at environmentalism and recycling and waste management. Most of the plastic doesn't get recycled. There was a huge model in the United States to accumulate it, send it overseas to Asian countries, and they would buy it and they would make things. But that process is ended. And so we're left with a lot of plastic going into landfills, being burnt and creating toxic chemicals. The company Ripple is a Missouri-based company who is taking glass and recycling it and creating a profit off of that. When we're looking at privatization of municipal services, where do you think that there is a need for that to come in? And where do you think that there should be a structure aligned to ensure that the commodification of something that we need to have makes it inaccessible?
That's a really interesting question. I think especially when you think about the production of waste, if we're talking about plastic, and that is something that I feel like a big cultural shift needs to happen away from plastic in general, the production of it on the front end. I appreciate when the market steps in and finds a use for products that are recycled. That really depends, in our capitalistic structure of there being a buyer at the other end. So I really think about us as consumers, part of the capitalist structure, and how we buy things, what we buy, when we do or don't buy something. And I think that changing globally, of course, is something that is a huge, individual by individual, but it does make a difference when that becomes the new norm. I think we need to focus on the reduction of waste. You asked a little bit about privatization of services. I'm not in favor of privatizing most government services that the city provides. I am interested in finding ways that private companies can help or participate, or how can the city benefit as well. I want to make sure that, the taxpayer at the end of the day, that's who I think of as, my customer, if you will, is I'm representing them. I want to make sure that the people who live in the first ward in the city are represented, and that their interests are being, most looked after. So I am interested in seeing how composting companies or different people who deal with materials like that can get involved in the city, as long as it ends up being a good deal for the taxpayer. And not that it has to mean that it's cheaper for them, but they have to be on board. And I think that that's where, again, that cultural change of what can we do? What are we willing to pay? What are we willing to put in to get this product that I think we should all really care about?
That's awesome. That's awesome. So I love animals. I think they're really cool. We are not alone on this earth. We've got these cute little fuzzy creatures, or flying little things that have no fuzz. Missouri is a huge hotspot when it comes to migratory patterns for hummingbirds, for monarch butterflies, for geese, etc. So when we're looking at the migratory patterns, there are many disturbances that are here from chemicals, deforestation, and even lights. So how can we create a safe city that doesn't disrupt the migratory patterns of these animals with lights?
Well, I really appreciate that question. When I first became an alderperson, I started looking into the Dark Sky Initiative, and you probably heard of it, but it's the idea that you can use other types of lighting in cities that are more beneficial to pedestrians and to drivers as well, while changing kind of the color of the light. Basically, it's a summary of it. And I brought that to the administration, and they weren't really interested in proceeding with it. And I'm not giving up on it, but that's where it was left. And it was right before buying a lot of LEDs in order to replace some of the streetlights. So I thought of it as a perfect time to do it, but I did not receive support from the administration when they were buying the lights, which I'm not over. No, I'm going to be honest. I'm still mad about that. But I think it's something that we should be doing. And I think that there will be a feeling of, well, if the lights aren't as bright, it's not as safe, when the data shows really that's not true. The cameras that are out, and some people think of as needing to be able to see, can still use that light. It doesn't change the ability for people to perceive the world around them. It's just at a different color temperature, basically something more orange than blue, if you will. And that is really helpful for both human health and animal health, to go with that kind of different lower Kelvin temperature, different, more orangey light. And I would really love the help on prioritizing that moving forward, as the city continues to need to purchase streetlights. But that brings up also the need of our public spaces to become focused more on native plants and species, and things that feed these migratory animals that are beneficial to the environment. Honeysuckle, birds eat it, but then they spread it. And so it's not ideal. It's not the right food for them anyway, but making sure that the right food is available. In Carondelet Park, a lot of natives are being planted, and it's really the focus is getting native plants into the ground, and there's bird habitat there. And I think people are changing their gardening techniques around the city to embrace native plants. You can travel to other places and see it a little bit more than I think it is in St. Louis right now. But I hope that we can change that. I know both of us have extensive gardens in our around our houses, so lots of native plants and things that feed the migrating animals. But you're absolutely right. We're not alone on this planet, and that is, I feel like, a sense of responsibility that we need to feel for our planet in our decision making. And so it comes down to, not only what the city is doing, but making sure that the people that we represent really understand that path and the reason to do that. There are some cities, Bogota is incredible with their green infrastructure and the plants that they have. And I'm just really blown away by what other cities have done across the world. And I think St. Louis could do more. Our forestry division is really great about getting plants in the ground. We're not always great about getting those trees to grow into big, healthy trees. And so again, when you get a new tree planted, are you watering it? Like what's happening from the moment the tree goes into the ground, and then again managing it through old age. So it is, like I said at the beginning of our conversation, so interesting to see, when you think about city services, those basics of planting a tree or picking up trash, mowing the parks. When you look at them through the lens of how they affect the environment, you look at them a lot differently than just picking up the trash. Because it's not just picking up the trash. It's like, well, now that trash is your responsibility. What are you going to do with it? How are you going to reduce the amount that people are throwing away? How are you going to make sure it's not getting into the water? It becomes a lot more interesting, I think, but also still the basic that we need to deliver as a city.
I love that. I really want to think about the future. The environmentalism, we have our indigenous and ancestral roots when it comes to the relationship with nature, but we live in a technological world. We are moving forward into green energy. We have cobalt being extrapolated from places like the Congo, and there are severe ethical problems around artificial intelligence and labor rights around the world when it comes to both artificial intelligence and electric machines and electric things. So when we're moving forward for St. Louis, we're going to have to be a technological savvy place. We're going to have to use cameras. We're going to have to use and accommodate policy for artificial intelligence, and we're going to have to create renewable energy sources. How can we ensure that we are ethical when we are bringing in this new technology and ecologically sound?
Well, I do appreciate that there are surveillance technology oversight plans that are submitted every year now, and I think that is very helpful. Whenever there's new technology in the police department, for example, they're submitting the plans. So if AI is going to be used in policing, for example, there would be a process for making sure the citizens know what's going on, or residents of the city rather know what's going on and can follow along with what's happening and participate and share their voice. So I think, one, always making sure what's going on is something people know about. So, you spreading the word and making sure people are informed about what's happening is crucial in that piece. I think also when the city is considering development, and that is a question that should be asked, if the company is an ethical company and when they're getting tax incentives, I think it's fair to ask about what the company does and if you have support or not. There was a project proposed in North St. Louis that wanted tax incentives that I didn't support because they were going to be building basically like an entertainment facility in North St. Louis along the river that would have been very disruptive for some of the waterway as well as migrating animals, and was just problematic. So it did pass. I didn't vote for it, but it hasn't moved forward at all. So, things like that come up, and you have to be willing to ask those questions of what's happening, what's the downside of this project. And I think that can be something that, as a city elected, that I have a role in terms of reliance on different energy, and especially around vehicles. I've been really passionate about making St. Louis a place that's easier to walk, bike, and take transit, which again comes down to kind of individual choice. But I do think people who live in a city want to live in a city because it's a city.
Mhm.
So St. Louis leaning into those things, we could have a really great bus system and metro system, and we could have a lot more biking infrastructure. And there's a lot planned, a lot in the works. And I take the bus regularly and can get around to where I need to go pretty easily on it. So I think making those things better and more available and taking the focus and the dependence off of those things can be really helpful in building a city that is looking towards that future of hopefully being less reliant on the things that are taking so much energy now.
Speaking of relying on energy, even our buses are, while they're electric, the electricity in the city of St. Louis is still generated by natural gas, and we're taken advantage by these energy companies such as Ameren, who can just increase the rate for users monthly, or just make us completely reliant, and we have to be on the same grid. What are ways that we can, one, break out of that grid?
Sure.
Two, make sure that even our buses who are electric energy are fully green, getting as green as possible, not just a green washed campaign?
I appreciate that question. And right now there is Ameren is trying to raise the rates again, and there are public meetings taking place now to voice your opinion to Ameren about that. So I think people should get involved in that and make sure that they're at the table for that conversation. The Sierra Club has been doing a great job in bringing information to light about what kind of energy reliance we have in St. Louis and how to get involved in and speaking up for the things that you do care about. I was helpful in getting a grant for the city of St. Louis, a Solar for All grant that was through the Inflation Reduction Act to get money into St. Louis for solar. One of the things that was frustrating about it, though, is that the state of Missouri has, regulations, rules with the energy companies that the community solar option that would be available in other states where there's a central community solar location. There's something in Missouri that stops that from being possible. And so it's things like that when you think about how does the government set us up to be able to move forward on things that make sense if there's lobbying by a company that maybe doesn't want that for us. And just being aware of what's going on and participating when it's in front of you. I think right now is a great time to get involved in Ameren's rate case and their desire to raise the rates.
Cool. Well, I think that's all the time we have. Do you have any closing statements you'd like to say?
Just thank you. I appreciate you having me. This is such an important conversation, and I think that we really need to talk about the environment more as often as possible, really. Again, it is part of every single service that's offered in the city of St. Louis. If you look at it in a way that that acknowledges the connection. And if you can acknowledge the connection, then you can see how the city could make changes without changing the services it offers, but to better its interaction with the environment. So thanks for having me, and it's an honor just to be here, and I appreciate your time talking with me today.
Yeah, you heard it first. There could be no St. Louis without the earth underneath it. Bye.